Morning, folks. Welcome to Tuesday's edition of Lake Superior Art Glass Fireside Chats. Today we are going to be learning how to perfect the loop. So that's one of the hardest parts of making any pendant or ornament is figuring out that loop and how to get it consistent, doing it well, making it durable, and making it look proportionate, which is another big thing. So I'm going to go over a bunch of the basics of loop making today. I think this video will be really helpful for anyone who is pursuing glass blowing and flame working. I do a lot of pendants and ornaments, so loops are something that I've refined many years ago and developed a really consistent process to get them done quickly and efficiently and maintain some really high quality results. So what we're going to be doing for most of the demo today is making loops on handles. This is what we make you in your class. So when you come in for a pendant making class or a icicle or sun catcher making class, we will have pre-made loops just like this on handles that you can just melt on your project because loops are so hard. And so to practice them and to break them down, I'm just going to keep them really simple in their form like this. And then at the end, I will give a demonstration of putting a loop onto a pendant. So a couple points to make of the loop. This is what will get connected to the project, this little tail here. And then this handle up here will come off when it's all done. So that is kind of the rundown for today. We appreciate you guys tuning in and supporting small businesses. We've had a bunch more orders come in, so thank you guys for that. We've got awesome clearance items on the website. Icicle Suncatcher earrings are on sale right now through tomorrow, and $5 of every local image pendant purchased through the end of the month goes to support the Small Business Fund for Minnesota. So we're trying to give back to artists, or not the Small Business Fund, the Artists Relief Fund for Minnesota. Small business stuff is on the mind because I was applying for a bunch of small business funding yesterday. So so support any way that you guys can. We appreciate you tuning in. And we're probably going to start a GoFundMe for these videos too, just if folks want to chip in $5 or whatever for watching our live demos, we'd appreciate it. GoFundMe is doing a campaign where they're going to match, I think, $500 if you raise up to $500. So we're going to try to do that since we have not received any other funding from any other sources. So keep your eyes open for that. As far as loop making goes, we're just going to start out with some clear glass. I've got some 6mm rod that's all been welded together from short pieces. That's what we make all of our loops out of. So when 6mm rod gets too short, we take it and weld it together and then make our loops out of it, so we're not wasting these short chunks that are too short to use by themselves. Give me 1 minute. I'm going to grab a jar of handles here. All right. So, these are on the short side, but we will make do. So essentially what we're going to be doing is taking the material from this longer clear rod, making the loop from that, but we need another handle to help control that glass. We're going to use the short one, and that'll actually be the handle that we stick on top of the loop when we're all done. That's our punty that's on the loop. Okay? So I like to break the loop down into a few separate moves for starters so that you can understand the importance of all of them. So take a look at that. I kind of describe it as a question mark, right? So it's obviously closed up, but that's essentially what you're trying to make is that question mark. And when you think about a question mark, when it curls around and starts going straight back down, that part that's straight back down is definitely at least at the center of your question mark. It's not all off to one side, if that makes sense. Kind of like if you had a backwards P. and that, you know, the straight part of the P is all on one side and then the hooked part is all on the other. That's what we don't want our loops to look like. And so that's why step number 1 is so important with making loops, is that we're going to overbend the glass. And so what I mean by that, I'm going to turn this off so I don't burn myself when I'm giving this demonstration. What I mean by that is, let's pretend we've got our clear glass rod, it's just straight, we've heated it up, and our loop is obviously going to come around this way, but what we need to do before we can bend it this way is we need to bend it this way. We need to overbend that loop. You can see when it comes up from straight, it shoots off this way first and then comes around. That makes sure that our loop is going to be centered on this post. And that's going to be centered front to back on your pendant, okay? So first step is we're going to bend it basically 90 degrees, the opposite direction that we want our loop to connect, okay? So the first step is a 90-degree bend. We're going to heat it up, bend it 90 degrees. Once that solidifies, then we're going to heat up about 1 inch right here. We're going to heat up 1 inch, and then we're going to take that up and over and have it pointing 90 degrees the opposite direction. We're not going to close that loop up yet. We're just going to take it from here and bend it around to here, okay? So flipping it over 180 degrees. And that move requires a little bit of a different hand holding technique or hand motion, which I'll explain in a minute when I get to do it. But that's step 2, is flipping it 180 from that 90-degree bend, bring it up and over to make that question mark, but we're not closing it. And then lastly, we'll heat up again right in here, and then we will pull it out and push it back in to make that connection. If we just go from here and just come straight down to connect, it'll do just that. It'll come straight down and it won't have that nice rounded arc to it. So again, the steps are, we're straight, we got 1 straight rod of glass, gonna bend it 90 degrees, let that cool for a couple of seconds, heat up about 1 inch of material, bend it up and over to make our question mark, let that cool for a second, heat it up again, and then pull it back and push it in to make that final connection. And that's how you're gonna make a really nice, even, fluid loop. And as you get more comfortable doing it, they'll become more fluid. So when you do break it down into the 3 steps like this, they don't always turn out the most fluid because you're heating and letting it cool, and so you might end up with slightly thinner, slightly thicker areas. But those are the basic steps. Once you get those steps down, it's just like anything else you have to practice, like piano. You gotta do it slow first. Once you learn it, then you can start speeding it up and getting faster and making it sound, or in this case, look how it's supposed to. Another key thing that goes along with that is the temperature of glass that you're using. So we don't want to get the glass liquid hot. We want to get it hot enough that we can bend it with ease, but we don't want it so hot that it's liquidy and we're relying on our skills to control that liquid glass. We want to maintain some of that structure that the glass rod already has to keep an even thickness all the way around, and that'll also help you get an even bend within the glass loop. If you're getting it so liquidy hot, you're going to be forced to make moves that will kind of detract from the integrity of that loop, whether it's structurally or aesthetically. So get the glass warm and malleable, but not so liquidy hot that it's out of control and you have to make moves that, you know, maybe you need to wait. You typically would need to wait, but now you're being forced to make that move because the glass is going to drip out of control. So the heat is the other really important factor in that. I think that's everything that I wanted to cover prior to showing you those steps live in the flame, and I really hope this helps. So check it out. Another really important tip, you guys can't see this, but I am using a lighter to light my torch. That is not best practice, because if you leave your lighter on your bench and a hot piece of glass chips off of your project and falls on it, or you set a hot piece of glass down on it by mistake when you're busy working on something, that hot glass will melt through this plastic lighter and make it explode, and you'll probably get a pretty good burn from it. So my lighter actually lives in, I have a tool chest to the right of my bench here, and it lives in one of those drawers. So it's never on my bench where hot glass could go onto it. It has been on my bench where hot glass can go onto it, and you can see it's been burned a couple of times. Shout out to Legacy Glass here. But yeah, so I've avoided it, disaster a couple of times there, but a little pro tip, don't ever leave a lighter on your bench. All right, so step one is just connecting up this handle. And you could look at this as though you're connecting your loop material onto your pendant, okay? All right, we're gonna use that heat to make our 90-degree bend. I've got this backwards. You always wanna have the rod that you are making the loop from, the material for the loop is coming from, in your dominant hand. So I'm right-handed, this is going in my right hand. Now, so we've made that 90-degree bend, we've bent it further than we need to, now we're gonna bring it up and around to make that question mark. We wanna heat up about 1 inch of material right past that 90-degree bend. Don't heat the 90, heat to the right of it in my case. We can't spin now because we're not on the same axis, but go left to right, so you heat up 1 inch of material. Okay, come out of the flame, bring it up and over, and boom, there's our question mark. You guys see that? Now, I'm in this pretty awkward position. You can see my right arm is up over top. Now you can rotate everything 180 degrees, like this. So now we've got a backwards question mark, and this is gonna be a lot more comfortable for you to finish your loop. Now we're gonna heat up 1 inch of material from kind of the end of our question mark over towards my right hand, and then we're gonna pull it out and push it back in to connect it right where our first 90-degree bend was. So it should look like this. Also notice I'm using a really small flame. You don't need a lot of heat, right? We're not trying to get this molten hot, so you don't need a big flame. You're just gonna fight yourself. All right, I got my heat. I'm gonna pull it out and then push it back in, and that helps me get that nice arc to the loop. Now this loop is not perfectly round, and I know that, and that's kind of what I was saying earlier, is that by breaking it into 3 steps, you're gonna get kind of a 3-sided loop, but the thickness should be fairly even throughout, and that's really important. We can always round it out. That's pretty easy to do. So your next step, now that we've connected it, is to remove the rod that we created the loop from, okay? So it's sticking right on there. We need to get it off. So we're gonna shoot our flame right onto that rod. But here's where some people go wrong, is they will get the rod that we were holding onto the loop with hot as well, and then the whole thing gets out of control. So the best way to alleviate this is that as soon as you do that 3rd step of making the loop, you touch it back, you stick it on, you immediately get down into that flame and start melting it off. You've got the heat there, and that prevents the other side of your loop from getting too hot. In this case, I had to show you this step and talk about it, so I'm gonna have to be a little more careful, and I'm gonna end up with a little bigger glob where I disconnect it than what I'd like. But that being said, we're gonna keep the rod that I'm holding it with and the loop basically below the flame, kind of by holding it at an angle like this, and shoot the flames right into that 90-degree bend, but keeping this rod out of the flame, okay? Kind of like that. And don't rush it, wait till it gets hot enough, pull it off, and let that flame cut through. So you can see I kind of got a big dollop there, and that's what's gonna happen if you don't disconnect this rod immediately. And so as we go through, I'll do a few more of these, you'll start to see what I mean, where you can avoid that big glob right there. So now, we need to make sure that this loop is structurally sound. We need to melt in the acute angles where that glass touched back on itself. So there's some pretty acute angles there. We want those to flow together. So it's one smooth, fluid piece of glass. So to do that, we're not gonna spin the glass, and we're gonna hold it kind of upside down. We want gravity to work with us. If we hold it right side up, as soon as you start getting this really hot, we're not spinning to counteract gravity, so your loop is going to start to droop off to the side. So hold it upside down and shoot the flame right into that acute angle where the two pieces come together. Right about the time this starts getting floppy and you think it might want to drip is right when it starts coming together. So in this case, because I've been talking so long and taking my time on this, it actually came apart. So I just stuck it back together. We're going to flow that connection point together. All right, it's pretty floppy now. You can see it moving. But on this side, I've flowed that area together pretty well. The acute angle you're seeing is being refracted from the back side. So you let the heat get out of the hot side you were just working on, and then we're going to flip it around to the other side and melt that seam together. You want to do them separately like that to give things time to cool down a little bit. Otherwise your loop's just going to be flopping around and it'll be really hard to control. All right. So now that's totally flowed together as one piece of glass. And now we can just round out our loop. Okay, we've still got this kind of triangular shaped loop here. Again, really important when you're working on your loops, don't get it liquid hot. You know, to get that area to flow together, that's maybe the only time I really get it liquid hot. Same thing goes for shaping though now, is I want it to be warm enough that I can move it, but not so liquid that it's out of control and then that I'm forced to make a move. So work a little further out in the flame and try to get that whole loop glowing evenly. Now that being said, every loop is going to be slightly different in the scenario. And what I mean by that is that you might have a thin side to your loop. When you have a thin side, you're going to try to keep that side cool while you heat up the rest of it. So it's not that every loop you want to get the whole thing warm to shape it. You might have a situation where you only need to get two sides of that loop hot and keep one side cool so you don't get it too thin. So I'm just getting this like glowing peachish orange, but not crazy hot. And then use my reamer to just go in once from each side and kind of round that out. Okay. Notice when I go in with the reamer, I'm always spinning it. That uses the 8 edges. It's an octagonal reamer. It uses the 8 edges to help pull the glass and move it around. And if you just shoved it in there, you'd get an 8-sided loop on the inside rather than a round loop. Let's see here. So yeah, that's pretty much it. The last step now is I'm just going to disconnect it, leaving that tail so this can be used in the class. So we're going to stick a punty on the top of it. A punty is an Italian word for bridge or to connect, or transfer. And so we're basically going to bridge the end of the piece that I'm working on. So I'm connecting it on this side so that I can remove this one. All right, so there we have our loop. It's a little lumpy, not ideal, but again, when I slow down and have to talk through each step as much, it's kind of what ends up happening. All right. So, we'll do this again. We'll stick our handle on the tip so we can control it. We'll heat it up to make our bend, our 90-degree bend. Okay. Once that's solidified, we'll heat up 1 inch of material from that 90-degree bend over towards my right hand. Left to right, so that whole area gets warm, not liquid hot, just glowing and moving. Bend it up and over, make that question mark. Okay, keep it at a 90 though. Everyone's tendency is to want to keep going and try to connect it in this move. Let this set up, otherwise you'll close your question mark. Now flip it around so it's more comfortable to hold. Heat up the last little section. It's probably more like a ½ inch versus an inch. And this step's really important too. Everyone wants to just shoot it right down and stick it on there, but you actually want to pull it out first and then stick it back down to give yourself a nice open loop. Okay, and then melt this off right away while you've got that heat in there. And boom. Look how much smaller that little blob is where I disconnected it. That's what happens when you do it right away. Now we'll melt in those acute angles where we joined it, doing one side at a time. Hold it upside down so we're working with gravity. And you'll just watch it flow together. Right about the time you think it's going to get out of control, come on out. That's usually when it gets melted together. So, it's hard to see, but that side is fluid. That side still has an acute angle. So now we'll get this side. Shooting that flame right into that acute angle, letting those two pieces just flow together. When you're wearing the specialized glass blowing glasses, you can see that glass flowing together. So I know it's hard for you guys to see in the video, but when you're doing it, you'll be able to see it. So my connection point is fully melted in. Really important to do that first, because then that determines how much glass we have left to work with for shaping our loop. If you go to shape your loop and then melt it in, chances are your opening is going to end up really small because you're also going to lose some size of your loop when you go to melt it in. So melt it in first, and then lastly, do the final shaping on your loop. So again, work a little further out in the flame, just kind of getting a nice even heat base in this loop, nothing too crazy hot. Okay, you can see that peach glow. Going once from this side, flip it around, and once from that side. Really important to go in from both sides, otherwise you'll push it. And I always like to hold the loop right in front of me and come in at a 90-degree angle. If you go like this, you guys can see it from your perspective, but I can't. If I start pushing that loop away from me, I can't tell. When it's straight up in front of me like this though, then I can see if I'm pushing it off to the side. All right, we'll stick a punty on the tip and disconnect this. So now you have seen all the steps broken down. We kind of talked about them. You've seen me run through it twice. This time I'm going to speed it up a little bit. I'm going to go a little closer to real time so you can see that as you get more comfortable with these steps, it also improves the fluidity of the loop, and they need less tooling at the end, and it should end up a little smaller. These loops that I'm making are pretty big. It's helpful so you guys can see them, but they'd be really kind of disproportionate on a pendant. All right, so we'll attach our handle. Make our 90-degree bend. Heat up that 1-inch section. Bring it up and over and flip it around. Heat up that last ½ inch section. Stretch it out and push it back down and disconnect. So I still got a pretty triangular loop, but it was a lot more fluid. We'll melt in the connection points. If you're going quick, you might have to flip back and forth like this. I'm basically doing both sides at the same time. Also shrinking down that loop a little bit as I do that step. Now warming up the whole thing so I can give it its final shape. There we go. so those are the basic steps to making a loop. I'll do one more, maybe even a little faster. The tough part is that to go too much faster, I have to change my method a little bit, only because that's how my muscle memory works. I've made tens of thousands of loops on different projects over my 17 years working with glass, and you know, it's like your body develops a certain speed at which you're efficient. So just like I am with cross-country skiing, I can't use great form going too slow. So that's where it gets a little tricky to show you the true pace at which I make these, but we'll give it a shot here. We'll see what happens. Typically when I'm teaching a student how to make loops, I don't even show them this right away, because their you know, instinct is to want to jump to being able to do it like this before they've mastered those basic steps. So 90, flip it, and then I'll pull it even more, stretch it out, and bring it back down. So you can see how much further that ended up towards one side, but then when I go to melt it in, I'm able to bring it back towards center. Okay, so I got a taller loop, but it needs a lot less tooling. It's much closer to that final shape we're going for. And now I can maybe just shrink it down and not even tool it. So just getting it barely warm enough that it moves, holding it at a slightly upward angle. That totally shrunk this down and made a really nice, more condensed, a little smaller loop than the other ones you guys have seen me make. So that's more so how I do it. It does thin the glass a little bit, but you get your thickness back when you shrink it back down. You can always shrink down a loop that's too big or too thin, but it's really hard to open a loop back up that you've got too small. So always make sure you're leaving plenty of opening in your loop, and that gives you plenty of leeway to make adjustments as you shrink it down. But if you do the opposite and you make a really small loop, opening within your loop, you're going to be fighting to get it open and get it big enough. So always err on the side of making it a little too big versus too small. So there we go. All right, so now I am going to make a pendant and do the loop right on the pendant so you guys can kind of see how that looks, just to kind of bring it full circle. I'm going to do a dichroic image pendant just because I happen to have some images sitting here that I'd like to make up. This one is a star cluster. These are from Dichroic Alchemy. Matthew Simpson makes phenomenal dichroic images. As I've talked about in other videos, dichroic is very sensitive to the heat. So I'm preheating it in the back of the flame with the dichroic coated side facing away from the flame. Here's a really important tip for making dichroic image pendants. If you have a round image, like this star cluster, you don't want to leave those square corners and melt them in, otherwise it'll squish and distort your image and it'll become more square-like. So you actually want to swipe those away. It's a little tricky. You got to make sure you don't heat up the image or anything like that, because this is a good opportunity to burn it out from getting it too hot. So just use the edge of the flame, heat up those corners, and swipe them away with another piece of glass. Alright, so it's a lot more round now. Not perfect, but as long as those square corners are removed, it'll make it a lot nicer looking. Alright, we're going to back it with black so that it really stands out. Got some jet black here. That's my go-to black for putting on the backsides of pendants. This method for making my image pendants is one that I've kind of pioneered over the years. It probably started with my Mille Fiori pendants, which I'm actually going to demonstrate later in the week. I forget if that's tomorrow or Thursday for that demo, but yeah, I kind of adapted from that, but it's a really tried and true method I've used for over 10 years now to make all of my magnifier pendants with either a milli or a dichroic image inside of it. So now we're going to stick on the punty so I can work on the front side of the pendant and get it rounded out. Removing any unnecessary lens. I've mentioned it in other pendant demos, but I really try to make my work very wearable and user-friendly. And so part of that is making sure that there's not too much of a domed lens on the front of the pendant. It's really easy for glass jewelry to be chunky, so I try to do everything I can to minimize that. Using my marble mold to help round it out a little bit, it just speeds things up. It also decreases the amount of heat you have to put into the pendant, which could burn out the image with the dichroic. Normally I do a little bit of kung fu here and flatten out that pendant even more. But I like how the image is really filling the circle, so I'm not going to do it on this one. Otherwise I'd end up with more of a border around the image. So for this loop, the setup's going to look a little different. I don't move my punty to the bottom of the pendant to make the loop. It's just one step I've eliminated over the years of refining this process to save a little bit of time. So the setup is going to look a little different, but the steps are all the same. Start by making your connection. I'm getting them both really hot so they flow together when they touch. And then you make that 90-degree bend, okay? You bend it 90 degrees towards the front side of the pendant. We're over bending. Then heat up about 1 inch of material. I bring it forward a little bit first. I'm over bending, bring it back around, flash it in the flame, and touch it back to connect it, and then remove it right away. So again, those steps are just slightly modified from the most broken down version that I covered at the beginning of the video. But those 3 steps are the key components to what I just did. They're just slightly modified for me to go a little faster and make the loop a little more fluid. Now I'm melting in the connection points, just like I did in the other loop. Working on the base of the loop first, getting all that glass flowed in so I know how much I have to work with as I do the final shaping of the loop. Now I'm heating up the whole loop so it can shrink a little bit. And I'll do some shaping. Really making sure that those acute angles get flowed in. The loop is the weakest part of any pendant, and so you want to make sure that all those connections are very, very fluid to ensure the highest durability of the piece. And then also I'm looking at it straight on so I can see if that loop is tipped one way or the other. Make sure you're looking at it straight on. If you're slightly off to the side, you're going to have a skewed perspective on it. You're going to end up with a bunch of wonky loops. A lot of times I find I have to go back in and touch up one acute angle as I'm looking at the pendant. It's going to be on the back left connection point. Just really flow that acute angle in. A lot of times I'll close one eye when I look at it too, and I'm looking over my glasses so I can really see it. Looking at a blank background helps too. I've got a white wall right behind the iPad that I'm looking at it against. And once I did that, I noticed that I just need to make a couple little adjustments here, both in the connection point where it's flowed together, and then maybe straightening it out just a touch. A quick, easy way to help straighten out a loop is to pull up on it, but you have to make sure that your heat is in the right place. If it's not, you're just going to make a really tall, stretched out, goofy looking loop. All right, I think that's it. So here's my loop, side profile, straight on. Okay, and now we'll work on taking it off of the puntee. Little tap breaks it free. We'll polish the back spot where that puntee was connected. And always give it one more flatten just to make sure you don't have any lumps or bumps on the back side. People really like to touch these when they're wearing them. Sometimes people kind of wear them as like a worry stone. And so making sure that the surface of the glass is very smooth and there's not random bumps or lumps. All right, now it's ready to go into the kiln. So there's a glimpse at it, still glowing orange. It'll be all black with kind of gold stars in it. There's a side profile. And that, folks, is how you make a loop. So I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope it helps. If you're ever pursuing this or coming in taking private lessons or doing it as a hobby on your own, watch this video a bunch, then make a bunch of loops, then come back and watch it again. That's how I always encourage my apprentices to learn, is to learn it from me, watch me do it a bunch. I'll watch them do it, give them some pointers, and then let them go work on it for like an hour, and we check back in and see how they're doing, because you don't absorb every little thing the first time. It takes, you'll make it a bunch, you'll have these issues, but you've gotten maybe 2/3 of the steps down, and then when you go and you revisit it by watching the demo again, then you'll catch that one little thing that'll be, oh, well, that's how I avoid that weird angle at this point, or whatever the case is. So it just takes lots and lots of practice. So do it over and over and over again, and making loops like this is not a bad idea, because honestly, if you make a pendant and you mess it up, you mess up the loop when you're making your pendant, you've got this whole stockpile of your practice loops sitting aside that you can just stick on there and finish it up, and away you go, and it kind of alleviates that struggle. So yeah, appreciate everyone tuning in, appreciate all the support. Keep checking our website for new deals, and the Artist Relief Fund, we're doing that through the end of the month. $5 of every local image pendant purchase goes towards the Artist Relief Fund of Minnesota. And icicle earrings are on sale right now, great Mother's Day gift. And if you've got any pendant ideas you'd like to see me make live on our stream every weekday at 10 o'clock, shoot those over. There's a form you can fill out on the website, lakesuperiorartglass.com. So please like, subscribe, comment. We appreciate the support, and keep supporting small businesses. Thanks so much, you guys, and we'll see you tomorrow.